lost private. We're in Normandy.
Thanks for checking in here at the We're Not Lost Private podcast. We appreciate all your support. But do you know how else you can support us? By signing up at Patreon. For $3 a month, you'll have access to all of our episodes, plus access to all kinds of bonus material, like our quarterly newsletter, photographs, and official paperwork, and research that goes into each and every show. You can follow the pod on a multitude of platforms such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, pretty much anywhere you catch your pods. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Welcome, everybody, to episode 42 of the We're Not Lost Private podcast. Feels like it's been a million years since I've gotten on here and recorded a pod. I want to thank everybody who supported the Easy Company myth-busting pods that I did. It's really great show support, and for all the other pods that we've put out lately. I do realize it's been heavy 101st Airborne content, and it will be for the next couple, but I promise you we've got some great guests coming up. We're going to do some more 8th Air Force and 100th Bomb Group stuff. We're going to bring back on Matt Mabe at some point, one of the group's historians. He's already been on the pod once before in the earliest days of the pod. And then we're also working on some other stuff for some Pacific War topics that I think everybody will find interesting. But in this case, I wanted to do one that I've been promising for a while, and this is going to be on the battle around Les Droueries in Normandy on June 6th, and I'll get to the background of it shortly. For all of you catching us on YouTube or Amazon Music or Apple Podcasts or whatever podcatcher you're picking this up on, thank you so much. All our new patrons on Patreon, also thank you so much. Also looking for listener questions. If you've got something that you want me to present or do some research on or throw up there as a pod at some point, please let me know. And I've also been talking to Leighton, and hopefully we're going to work through some stuff for him to come on and talk about a project that's been very special to him of late. So with that said, I'm gonna crank up the slides here and get everything ready. And I hope everybody's doing well. And here we go. So a little bit of background on the this particular fight. The Les Droueries it wasn't really the objective of either one of the units that ends up fighting there. They had other objectives to take care of, but the fight sort of snowballs and gets a little bit out of the control of the commanders in the area for a number of reasons, and I'll go over those as we get further along. But first off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the terrain. The area where this takes place is northeast of Saint-Côme-du-Mont, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Normandy geography, Saint-Côme-du-Mont is northwestish of Carentan. So if you get a chance to look at the map, you can understand. Now, with that in mind, the area is very much hedgerow country down there, but it's mostly farm fields bordered by hedgerows. But you also have the area around several bodies of water, several flowing bodies of water in the area, including the Douve River. And the Germans utilize this as part of their defenses. They as many of you probably know, they flooded they opened the locks and flooded the terrain to make it inhospitable for paratroop operations. And this ends up causing a lot of problems, and it floods the area around Angeville-au-Plain, which is part of where the drop zone is located. And it'll affect the drop, and it'll also affect the troops' ability to move to their objectives. And we'll get to the objectives shortly. But those of you that are looking on YouTube, you can see that the terrain, it's like cut. It's not even symmetrical. I mean, the ways the fields are cut are very much a natural phenomenon, in that the shapes are not uniform. And this will also affect how the troops are able to gather and coalesce to complete their missions, because some of them remain isolated in fields, and they never make it over to join up with their comrades. So, and as we know, the Germans like to fortify critical fields near major roads or anything like that, so they could prevent them from being taken. They turned each of these little fields into a fortress almost. Um, so the terrain is not exactly great for paratroop operations, in that there are a lot of ways to prevent the coalescing of troops after the drop. But what you do have is you do have large fields. And this works well for the paratroopers because most of the time you can avoid a tree, you can avoid an injury. So there are pluses and minuses to this, and that's the terrain that the units in question will be dealing with, both on the U.S. side and on the German side. And with that, we'll look at the units that are involved. For the Germans, the troops in this area come from the 91st Luftland Division, and I've covered this unit previously. Everybody thinks that, Luftland, Airland, that they are an anti-airborne unit. They are not. They are meant to be air-landed as a unit. And so the urban legends and the myths of this unit being an anti-airborne unit is not true. The units in question that'll be facing the paratroopers that are jumping into this area are a Grenadier Regiment 1058, specifically their 3rd Regiment, and also a recent addition to the 91st Luftland in June of May. I think it was May. I'm sure Niels Henkemans will yell at me if I get it wrong, but it was, I believe, May of 44, where Major Friedrich August Freyer von der Heid is ordered into the Normandy area with his unit, specifically near the drop zone, and where the 2 paratroop units will be jumping into. And it's going to be his 2nd Battalion that ends up bearing the brunt of this fight. For the Americans, the largest portions of the troops that are going to be coming in the area belong to the 3rd Battalion of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment and the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. 501st is commanded by the legendary Colonel Howard Johnson. Let me revisit some of the enemy stuff first. And again, I'm a hat tip to Niels on the information here. He did a lot of research, and his Defending Normandy books are excellent if you have any interest in the topic. But they possessed a mix of 18 to 20-year-old troops, and those in their mid to late 30s. They were a standard infantry disposition when it came to, they had a standard disposition in terms of weapons when it came to especially machine guns and mortars. And according to a company commander in that regiment, most of the NCOs were not professional infantry NCOs. Many of them have been combed from higher headquarters and transportation units. And this will affect their ability to operate as standard infantry units, because the people leading them are not exactly top of the line infantry non-commissioned officers. The 2nd and 3rd battalions of the 3rd Regiment of I'm sorry, of the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd and 3rd battalions of the 1058 had been ordered to defend the area around Saint-Côme-du-Mont. And this is going to be critical because many of these troops will be positioned in a way where they're going to influence the battle around Les Droueries. So that's the reason why we're really discussing them. As for 2nd Battalion of the 6th FJ, they're ordered to establish a defensive line from the northern outskirts of Hoosville via Beaumont and down to Les Droueries. And for those of you who are watching this, I'll show it on the map shortly. And then once they're in those positions, they're supposed to tie in with the 1058 to make a continuous line of troops to defend the area around Saint-Côme-du-Mont. Back to the 501st. The legendary commander of the 501st, Colonel Howard Jumpy Johnson, had been their commander since inception, the inception of the regiment. In this case, the unit in question that'll be jumping into this drop zone is the 2nd Battalion, led by Floridian Robert Ballard. He's a lieutenant colonel and a commander of the 2nd Battalion. For the 506th, obviously, most folks who listen to this pod know who Colonel Sink is. I won't belabor that, but his 3rd Battalion commander is Lieutenant Robert Bull Wolverton. He commands the 3rd Battalion, much beloved commander, and unfortunately, he won't be able to influence the battle once it starts. Moving down, I want to look at talk about the drop zones and the missions. The drop zone, again, is centered around the area near Angeville-en-Plaine, which is about, I want to say 6 miles away, southwest from Utah Beach. And the drop zone is bisected almost evenly, with the 2nd Battalion of the 501st coming in on the southwest portion of the drop zone, while the 3rd Battalion of the 506 comes in the northeast portion of the drop zone. At least that's the way it's supposed to be planned out. Both units are ordered to seize and hold or destroy bridges over the Douve River to prevent German attacks across the bridges and into the flanks of that unit. And then if they accomplish their mission, they'll prevent the Germans from counterattacking up towards Utah Beach and essentially flinging the 4th Infantry Division back into the sea. So the 2nd Battalion of the 501st has one bridge. Each of these bridges is about 2 miles or so away from the drop zone. But again, the fields around this area are all flooded. So that's going to influence their ability, the paratroopers' ability to get to those objectives quickly. And the 3rd Battalion of 506 is responsible for seizing 2 bridges over the Douve, and they are located southeast from the drop zone as well. Again, about 2 miles as the crow flies. Both units will be coming in on drop zone D, and again, you're not very far away from Saint-Côme-du-Mont. It's to the southwest of the drop zone as well, and Les Droueries is just right outside the drop zone. Now, for those of you looking at this on YouTube, you'll see that thick red line. That is the continuous line of troops from the 1058th and the 6th FJs, what they've manned. And now, again, there's not enough troops to cover that entire line evenly all the way across, so they're picketed across that area. But many times they're also in depth in the fields to the southwest of that line, all the way up towards Ouville. Looking at the drop, both units are brought to, they're flown into Normandy by 2 different units. You have 45, the 15th serial is flown in by 45 aircraft from the 441st Troop Carrier Group flying out of Merrifield. There's a 2nd Battalion of the 501st they're carrying, along with C Company of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion. Their second and 3rd platoons from that particular company, along with a detachment from the 326th Airborne Medical Company. They're coming in on drop zone D. Their time on target is 0137 hours in the morning. For the 3rd Battalion of the 506, they're coming in on serial 16. It'll be the entire battalion coming in, along with 1st platoon of C Company of the 326th Airborne Engineering Battalion, plus some supply elements. They'll be traveling on 45 aircraft from the 440th Troop Carrier Group and flying out of Exeter Airfield. Their time on target is 0143 hours. So as you can see, it's a very tight timeline for these battalions to be coming over the drop zone. Literally, they're coming over within 6 minutes of each other. Now, I have reported in the past of nuances in the mostly generalized look at how the air crews performed during the Normandy invasion. A lot of it had to do with some of the things that Stephen Ambrose wrote about, and the Troop Carrier Group men, the Troop Carrier Squadron men, took a lot of umbrage with that. They were not happy with the way he characterized their performance. He didn't like the fact that he was insinuating that they were cowards. So I like to make sure that the Troop Carrier guys get a say in this. In particular, uh, I'm able to quote Captain Don M. Orcutt of the 440th Troop Carrier Group, and he said the 440th had a wise old head in command, Colonel Frank Krebs, and upon entering the fog over near the drop zones, they descended to just below the undercast. We rode into the drop zone with little or no trouble. We did lose 3 aircraft inbound, however, due to flak. I remember flying through low-hanging tendrils of scud that briefly blacked out my squadron leader's aircraft. We flew straight and level right to the drop zone, no jinking, no altitude changes. And that's really interesting because these these units had a very concentrated drop over their drop zone, especially 3rd Battalion of the 506. Unlike some of the other sticks that, the 506 sticks that were also supposed to drop in drop zone C, which is north of D, ended up dropping up near Saint Mariglis and Saint Martin de Verville and up in that neck of the woods in Fouquerville. So I mean, these guys ended up having a fairly compact drop. Unfortunately for them, they dropped on a large body of German troops, and it's going to end up costing them dearly later on. But interestingly, Frank Lillyman, who is a Pathfinder, who jumped up north, but he also had this to say in his after action. Credit should be given to the 440th and 441st groups of Troop Carrier Command. Using radar only and no lights because of the tenuous position, 47 aircraft delivered their personnel to the intended drop zone. This totaled more than the other 2 drop zones combined. So, I mean, for all the criticism that has been heaped on the troop carrier guys in modern history, it's great to see that the men who are actually flown in there. And I know General Gavin also had spoke highly about the performance of the troop carrier guys that dropped his unit into Normandy as well, and so did Ed Cannonball Kraus. He also had good things to say about their performance. So I want to make sure we level the bubbles with that, and we talk even-handedly about the performance of the troop carrier guys. So the 2nd Battalion of the 501st starts coming in at like I said, at about 0140 hours between there. 0137, 0140. It really depends on the aircraft and how much fog. Maybe they throttle back slightly a little bit, but anyway, Len Griffing served in E Company of that battalion, of the 2nd Battalion of 501st, and he remembered the approach to the drop zone. I looked out into what looked like a solid wall of tracer bullets. I remember this clearly as if it happened this morning. It's engraved in the cells of my brain. I said to myself, Len, you're in as much trouble now as you're ever going to be. And if you get out of this, nobody can ever do anything to you that you'll ever have to worry about. Little did Len know that statement was incorrect. And the 3rd Battalion of the 506 started coming in right after them, about 0150. Johnny Gibson, who was a medic in the 3rd Battalion headquarters, he recalled the enemy fire during the run into the drop zone. The German 20mm anti-aircraft guns pounded out a weird tune, and their red balls of fire licked up at us like fire from an angry serpent's tongue. The air cracked and snapped with the sound of bullets. The green light came on, and out into the night sky full of red streaks we leaped. I mean, that's some powerful stuff if you think about it, man. The rounds are coming in. I know there was some criticism of Band of Brothers that the amount of fire shown in Band relative to where the 2nd Battalion of the 506 dropped. And I distinctly remember sitting down with Buck Compton and talking about it, and he told me that he thought the show did a great job of it, but it was a little overstated in his mind. Like he didn't remember the fire being as thick and violent as what was seen in the miniseries. I think that the men that dropped into drop zone D could probably say that the portrayal in Band of Brothers is much more accurate to their jump based on all of the accounts that I've read. It was very violent and there was lots of fire. And again, they jumped right over a large body, a condensed body of German troops. But this will end up costing both battalions heavily. And in this case, we'll start out talking about Wolverton's battalion, the 3rd Battalion of the 506. Specifically, Wolverton and his his XO. Bull Wolverton exited the aircraft and fell northeast of Saint-Côme-du-Mont. He was well west of the drop zone D and floated down towards an area that was teeming with German troops. On top of it, his executive officer, Major George Grant, had jumped from the same stick and was coming down in the same area. Enemy fire arched up into the sky, rifles, MP40s, and machine guns, and both men were killed as they descended. In short order, the 3rd Battalion had lost its 2 most senior leaders. Now, this is going to affect them, the battalion, because now not only did they lose Wolverton and Grant, but they also end up losing several company commanders as well. So the leadership of the battalion and the companies ends up shifting down to lower level leaders who might not necessarily be ready to fulfill those jobs, but in any case they have to. And this ends up affecting them as they go forward to complete their missions. One of the sticks from Wolverton's battalion was that of Staff Sergeant Zalman S. Rosenfeld. He was the G Company supply sergeant, and he led his stick of troopers out the door. This stick you see here, if you're looking at this on YouTube, this was a pre-D-Day jump. Zal is the second from the left on the bottom row. He was followed out the door by the company armor, Warren Nelson. Nelson is actually standing 4th from the left in the back of the photograph there. The first person that Zal linked up after landing with was Staff Sergeant Mike Whedon. Whedon had suffered a broken ankle on the drop, and he tried to keep up. The area where they jumped was thick with men from the 3rd Battalion of the 506th. It overlapped with some of the troopers who jumped from Wolverton's stick. So these men were lucky as they, they weren't killed during the drop. But Zal ends up linking up with First Lieutenant Howard Littell, who was the 81 millimeter mortar platoon leader for the battalion, Corporal Ray Calandrella, and PFC Earl McGrath. Some of those men came out of Stick 8. The first man Littell had run into was Calandrella, and he's had this say, "I saw the hunched shape of a man creeping toward me through the gap in the hedge. As he got closer, I began to run a couple of scenarios through my head. Should I use the bayonet or squeeze the trigger? I didn't want to do either, but time was running out. So I nervously used my cricket. Click clack, no response. And again, this is Calandrella, by the way, if I didn't make that clear. I repeated the process. Click clack. There was still no response, and I raised my rifle to shoot. Suddenly, I noticed a jump rope hanging from the guy's belt. It was Lieutenant Littell. After introducing myself, I whispered, "Why the hell didn't you use your cricket?" In a hushed voice, Littell replied, "I'm sorry, I just couldn't find it." "Couldn't find it," I said in disbelief. "I came that close to pulling the trigger, Lieutenant." Littell just shrugged his shoulders and told me he got separated from the rest of the stick and that I should join him. After some time, they gathered up about 10 or 12 or 13 troopers. Not knowing exactly where they were, the group moved slowly and methodically towards what they thought was the right direction. Some troopers, including Whedon, fell out of the column after a bit, so they separated and the column became a little bit smaller. But the main group, which included Zal and Lieutenant Littell, managed to find their way towards La Basse-Abbeville. Now, that area sits south of the drop zone, and it is a village to the east of Ferme Delaunay and where Les Droueries sit. So they're all in this general area around Les Droueries. We're going to come back to their stick later on, probably in part 2. This is the first part of what's going to be a 2-part. It's not really a series when it's only 2, but it's 2-part episode. This one will air in the middle of August. The next one will be after that. But anyway, moving on, we'll talk about another 3rd Battalion stick. This one previously referenced Johnny Gibson, medic. He ended up jumping from the same stick as many of the guys from the battalion 81 millimeter platoon. He remembered that those guys were having a tough go of it trying to get out the door with the leg bags. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the leg bags, or we talked about the leg bags previously. They just didn't have a lot of time to train on them, and as a result, a lot of the guys overfilled them, and so it was difficult for them to exit the aircraft quickly. Um, One of the guys tripped heading for the door, several up from Gibson, and while the guy was behind him was helping him up, everybody was screaming at them to get going because they were obviously taking lots of fire going into the drop zone. As Gibson went out the door, he was followed by Private Charles Lee. After landing, Gibson and Lee reunited after exchanging some click-clacks on their crickets. And Gibson, not knowing if it would do him any good or not, he ended up taking off his Red Cross brassard, and then the pair gathered up their gear and got ready to move out. Gibson had this to say: "We moved out cautiously down a hedgerow and under some trees. There we found George Rosie. He was overjoyed to see us. In his words, he was glad as hell. Rosie was an ex-football player and the biggest and best built man in the 81 millimeter mortar platoon. The platoon was known for its strong men. They were also referred to as the Stovepipers by Lieutenant Littell. So that's where the name of that slide comes from. As the trio sorted themselves out, they spotted the C-47. Basically, it was coming right towards them, and it was already on fire. It screamed in low over their position. Luckily, they dropped to the ground and it missed them, and it impacted the ground in a huge fireball well behind them. Um, the three men picked themselves up, Gibson, Rosie, and Lee, and then spotted uh, four men sprinting towards them. And at first, they didn't know if they were friendly or not. But as the men closed the distance, they could see it was PFC Leo Krebs, Private Phil Abbey, PFC Cyrus Swinson, and Private Francis Renzani. Uh, they were all dripping wet because they had landed in a deeper portion of the drop zone. But they had all jumped from the same stick with Gibson, Lee, and Rosie. So basically, the stick had partially assembled. They moved out and tried to skirt around the flooded areas and by 05, it was starting to get light out, and they were like Zal's group approaching La Basse-Adeville, but they did not link up with Zal's group. It's starting to get light out, and Abby was walking lead. They had walked in a ditch mostly along the side of the road to stay off the road, but the ditch started essentially filling in progressively as they were walking. So Abby, who was walking lead scout, and Ranzani, who was walking connecting scout, came up on the roadway. And as they left what was left of the ditch and got up on the roadway, Gibson spotted a German helmet. And before he could even say anything, about a dozen Germans stood up and began peppering the small column with their MP40s. Abby and Ranzani were cut down right away in the initial burst of fire, and Gibson and Swinson low crawled out of the ambush, and Rosie and Krebs tried to follow them, but they were captured right away. Lee managed to get away. Um, Gibson was also captured, and at one point, a German who captured him pointed his pistol at Gibson's head and pulled the trigger, but there was no round in the chamber. But he started laughing at Gibson when he flinched because of the sound of the pin striking home, but no round. They basically they took everything off of them: his wallet, his watch, all of his knife, his jump knife, and his medical kit, and then marched him over to where Abby and Ranzani were lying in the road. And each one of them was still gasping for air, blood coming out of the wounds on their chests. And uh, Gibson, the medic, quickly moved to get over to where they were to try and treat them. And the Germans kept pulling them back. And they basically made them watch Abby and Ranzani die in the middle of a road. And Gibson was so pissed off. They made them just watch them die instead of allowing them to treat them. And as soon as they were doing that, and as Gibson was just absolutely seething, a couple of rifle rounds cracked past the group. It was Charles Lee. He had taken up a position. He was trying to shoot a couple of the Germans who were guarding the men, and Gibson watched a couple of the Germans just sit there and hatch a plan that they were basically going to pin down Lee and flank him, and they did. And the two Germans went after him. One of them pinned him down with fire, and then the other one killed him. And to Gibson's memory, Lee had a young 1-year-old child back in the States that he was never going to see again, and that really bothered Johnny Gibson. We're going to come back to some of the 3rd Battalion men, including these guys, in part 2, and we're going to start talking about Ballard's battalion. For Ballard, his jump worked out perfectly. I mean, he landed right on the DZ. During the flight in, he had a door position. He was able to match up features on the ground. He could see everything looked just like the terrain models and the aerial photography that they had studied back at the airfield. He hit the ground. It was a soft landing because the ground was damp. It was moist. It wasn't completely flooded where he landed, but it was soft. He took his time getting out of his chute, and as he was doing so, enemy machine gun and mortar fire started impacting in the field. He could see a hedgerow about 25 yards away, so he made his way over there, and figured, I'll just wait for them to get tired of shooting at an empty field, and then I'll figure out what's going on. So he pulled out his red lens flashlight. He pulled out his poncho, and his raincoat, and put it over his head, and he put his map out, kind of figured out where he was based on the flight in and then the terrain features around him. And he knew he was a few fields away from where he wanted to set up his command post, but he knew he was in the right place. And as he was, putting his gear back in his musette bag, he heard a clicker. He heard the click clack of a cricket, and so he responded, and it was Sergeant William Jackson of his D company. And Jackson told him, I found the XO, the executive officer, Major Ray Bottomley, and they went over to the XO, and he had a wrenched ankle, and so he wasn't exactly in 100% shape. But Bottomley looked at Ballard and said, "Hey, don't worry, I'll keep up. I can do a damn good job of crawling." The mortar machine gun fire continued, and there was lots of flares arcing up, a lot of very pistol flares coming up from the sky from the direction of Saint-Côme-du-Mont. So they had basically a waypoint that they could fix on from that, and the trio started towards the assembly area. They ran into another NCO from E Company, and he had already been assembling troopers. And they decided they were going to start the war right there. That was it. They were going to assemble as what they could of the battalion. They were going to put the command post in action, and they were going to get ready to go. At 0330, and remember they jumped around, what, 140-ish. By 3:30, Ballard had assembled quite a bit of his battalion, along with a bunch of strays from the 3rd Battalion of the 506th. They had moved along the ditches and the hedges to get themselves into position. They were able to collect up 4 light machine guns, a bazooka, and a 60mm mortar. It wasn't the full complement of weapons that the battalion would have, obviously, but some firepower is better than nothing. By 4 o'clock, well, the Lieutenant Bill Sefton had checked in. He was a battalion S2 officer, and he detailed Sefton to take off with 4 men and go contact either the 1st Battalion or regimental headquarters to let them know his situation. Now, as they continue to assemble in the assembly area, he starts to move out his men towards their objective, which he's doing 2 things at once. They're trying to get to their objective to the southeast, which is to the bridge area. But as he begins to move out, they begin taking fire from Les Droueries and from Delaunay, and this basically kind of forces his hand. He knows he cannot march onto the bridge while leaving his right flank open. So they're going to have to reduce the Germans' fire, or reduce the German positions in those areas in order to complete the movement to the objective. He makes the decision to attack Les Droueries, and has his operations officer, Bill Pelham, issue the order at 0430. and this is strange because none of the company commanders has showed up at this time. So they're being led by what few officers are available for the companies. The concept for the attack is that they're going to attack two companies abreast, with E Company on the right flank and Fox Company on the left flank, with D Company in reserve to follow up Fox Company into the objective area. The companies right now only have about 30 men each, but Ballard pools his machine gunners to provide supporting fire. And what the companies are going to do is they're going to use the hedgerows to make their way towards first the firm Delaunay and then down to Les Droueries. So they're gonna that's how they're gonna make their way through the area, and then attack. They're gonna use those hedgerows to kind of conceal their movements up to the area where they're gonna attack. Prior to the attack kicking off, Ballard and some of the men had some of the men from the light machine gun platoon head out search for resupply bundles. They were very short on medical supplies. They were definitely short on radios. He only had a 536 radio, which is a little handy talkie. Um, the walkie-talkie was actually the SCR 300, the big backpack radio. Everybody calls walkie-talkies what the handy talkie is. They had quite a few injured from the jump and a number of men without weapons, and they needed whatever they could scrounge from those resupply bundles. Of course, if they had casualties, they could redistribute the weapons, but they were having the number of wounded was growing from jump injuries and now incoming fire, and they needed to have more medical supplies. So at 0530, the attack kicks off. Now the companies are moving in column along those hedgerows. Um, they're basically on the same field, advancing on the same field, E and F company, but they are on the insides of the hedgerows of that field, so they can literally look across the field and see each other as they advance towards um, the farm. They got about 200 yards to go before the enemy fire from the farm complex begins to lash into the ranks. They throw smoke grenades to cover their advance, and Company E moves all the way up towards the farm complex and gets to a, a hedgerow that runs basically perpendicular to their route of advance. So they're able to move up to that hedgerow. F Company. Sorry, let me there's more to the E Company story, obviously. There's enemy rifle and machine gun fire coming from the farm, and now mortar fire is beginning to splash in the field around the area. E Company goes flat in their hedgerow that they were advancing along, and again they move up to that perpendicular hedgerow, and the fire picks up in intensity. The Germans know they're there. They start picking up their rate of fire. There's branches and leaves raining down on these guys as they settle in. As they're doing so, they settle in, and then the German fire starts to abate. When they don't have a lot of visible targets, they start to slow down the rate of fire, and the attack resumes. Now, E Company right now is being led by Lieutenant George Schmidt, and he is up at that hedgerow line, and basically he goes to get up to rally the men, and he's hit. Now, there is some confusion about what happens to Schmidt. Some accounts have him being killed outright with the first shot, and another account has him being hit, but still functional, but he's hit again and killed. Sam Rayborn had been in Schmidt's platoon before he became the executive officer for the company. And he had this to say: Lieutenant Schmidt was formerly my platoon leader. After wandering through the night, various incidents such as watching anti-aircraft fire shoot down a glider, I arrived at a battalion about 10 a.m. In moving to my company area, I came across Lieutenant Schmidt lying in a hedgerow, still breathing. He was being watched over by a mortar sergeant who said tearfully, "The dumb son of a bitch kept sticking his head up in the same place." Now, if you think about what um, Rayborn said, about 10 o'clock he arrives and Schmidt is still alive, but it's probably about maybe 6:30 by when he's probably first hit. I mean, that's a lot of time for him to hang on. Um, but despite Schmidt being hit and mortally wounded, they keep advancing under the command of Lieutenant Vern Mertz, who had been the battalion's light machine gun platoon leader. He takes over E Company and he keeps pushing them up, and they get towards the outer area near the farm, near the buildings there. Now, Fox Company is moving along their uh, route as well, parallel to E Company coming in. They're on their flank. They're heading towards the farm complex. Jack Schaffer of Fox Company's first platoon, he led the column. They had two light machine gun teams that had moved up into the Fox Company along with Fox Company, and they finally set up to support both Fox and Easy Company with supporting fire from the hedgerow line that Fox Company had been advancing on. So essentially, they'll be firing into the flank of the Germans from F Company's old, previously manned hedgerow position. I know it sounds a little confusing, but it's not. They were following in trace of F Company, and they basically, when F Company continues its march forward, the machine guns set up, and they're from their position, they're able to support both companies advance on the farm complex, because from where they're positioned, they have a direct line of sight towards the farm complex. But I mean, the moment those machine guns open fire, the 230 calibers open fire, I mean, they get the response is terrific. The machine gun is a critical piece of firepower for a small unit, and the moment the enemy knows there's a machine gun in play, that becomes the focus of fire for the enemy. They want to put as much fire on those positions to knock those machine guns out, because that's the supporting fire, and essentially it's the supporting fire for both of these companies as they make their advance. Despite the fire, though, Fox Company continues the steady advance up the hedgerow. Um, and as when you get into that area to the east of where the farm is, there's a little dirt track that emerges onto the main pavement there. It forms like a bit of a T intersection, and we're gonna talk a little bit about Leo Gillis and Gillis's Corner. For those of you who read Mark Bando's books, you'll know the story of Leo Gillis and Gillis's Corner. Um, Lieutenant Quincy Cougar of the 3rd Platoon was leading the Fox Company element forward. Uh, he came up with Corporal Don Shinkoth and PFC Robert Houston and PFC James Luce, and they moved up into that area where that T intersection is. And I don't know if they were expecting to see Germans to their left as they advanced into near that T intersection, because most of the German fire had been coming from the farm, which was positioned to their right. So at some point, they might not have even seen that there were Germans to their left, and they're taken under fire right away. Shinkoth is killed by a rifle grenade, and I believe Houston was as well. And I think Luce was shot in the hand because his hand was almost severed by the return fire. It could have been shrapnel from the rifle grenade. Um, no one will ever know at this point. But anyway, the 3 men are hit. 2 of them were killed outright, and Luce will later um, die of his wounds. But as Luce pulls back, because he had moved across the road and was caught in the fire by the Germans to the left of where the road spills out into the T intersection. He comes across the road, and Cougar tells him to go back and get patched up and tell Sergeant Gillis to come up here. So um, Leo Gillis comes up he's moving up towards where they were positioned to link up with Cougar, and he ends up he's shocked when he sees Luce, because basically his hands basically held on by a few tendrils of skin and maybe a ligament or two, but other than that, there's nothing holding it on, and it's spurting blood out of it. And he heads up towards where Cougar is. At the time, Bob Gatings, another rifleman in the company, had moved up to where Cougar was located, and he starts to peer around this wood fence that's near where the T intersection sits, and Gillis yelled at him to pull back, and just as he did, the German machine gunner peppered the fence with, pieces of wood flying everywhere. Gillis makes his way up towards the area, sees what's going on, sees Luce's web gear, his fighting harness on the other side of the road, takes a quick look and sprints across the road, and he gets into a position where the Germans can't really see him very well. Um, these Germans um, come, they leave their position. I think they thought they'd killed all the Americans that were in the area. What they didn't know is Gillis and Cougar and Gathings were still in the area, and they basically climb down off the hedgerow that borders the road leading away from the farm and leading from the T intersection. They drop down from the hedgerow, and two of them pop out on the road, and one of them stays in the ditch. And Gillis drills all three of them, and one of them had the MG42 on his shoulder when Gillis killed him. But Cougar's like, he can't see it from his position. He's like, "Did you get him?" And Gillis is like, "Yeah, I got him." And with the Germans killed, Cougar gets up and walks down to where the bodies are, and one of them's still alive, and Cougar finishes him off with his sidearm. And then the pair began checking the area. They found um, a pair of binoculars with Houston's name taped to it with one of the Germans. But this is literally somewhere between 07 and 08 by now. And both companies at this point, remember, they only had about 30 men when they started. They're down between 7 and 10 men in each company, either wounded or killed. And so, they're in a tenuous position trying to hold this area. So Ballard moved up his command post so he could better control the battle. He moved up to that hedgerow that was perpendicular to the or running parallel to the road that the farm sat on. So what he does is he's trying to get a good view of what's happening with his battalion. And at this point, a lieutenant from 1st Battalion of the 501st by the name of Walter Wood shows up, and he's gathered up about 20 troopers from 3rd Battalion of 506. Most of these guys are from G Company. Now, this action might have happened slightly before the action at Gillis's Corner. So you'll have to bear with me with the timing sequence on this. But anyway, Wood has gathered up these troopers. He checks in with Ballard and he basically says, I've got these guys, they're itching to get into a fight, and I think we can help turn the flank of the German position. And so, Wood doesn't know Ballard other than from being in the regimental area and being at at officers' functions. He had been a demolition officer in 1st Battalion, and then when a platoon leader's billet opened up in C Company, he took the platoon. He was highly aggressive, and I think this is not me trying to shade anybody or pick on any particular battalion. Nasty Nassif, Michael Nassif was a PFC or a private in G Company. He'd been interviewed by George Koskamaki for his series of books, and Nasty had this to say. He's like, Wood was really kind of pissed off. There were a number of 501 men. Some of them were wounded in the assembly area, and Wood was trying to gather them up and get them into the fight. And they, and again, in their defense, there quite a few of them were wounded. And if you're wounded, you want to get treated. And if you're treated and you're still capable, you want to get back in the fight, you can. But a lot of times, if you're wounded too seriously, you obviously cannot get back into the fight. But anyway, he managed to gather up these guys, mostly from G Company and some of them from 3rd Battalion headquarters, and he takes them on this sweeping maneuver around a number of hedgerows and comes in on the left flank of the farm complex. Now, the Germans that ended up killing Houston and Shinkoff and eventually Luce um, may have been part of the garrison at the farm complex, that when Wood's group attacked, they pulled out and moved east down the road towards La Haute-Atteville. And these are the guys that might have been waiting for the men from Fox Company. And so they finally pushed south, and about 09 they're able to capture that little crossroads near, for those of you who've been in that area, you know where the memorial is at the farm, that's the crossroads they were able to capture, and they end up pushing towards the complex and capture one of the outer buildings, and basically the German troops had to pull back from that position and again down that road east. And at this point, I'm gonna stop here. This is gonna be the end of part one. Part two is gonna be we're gonna talk about the second parts of the battle. We're gonna talk some more about those sticks I discussed earlier. I had a real fun time putting this together. Lots of sources. I want to thank Niels Henkemans, Paul Woodage, Mark Bando, Ian Gardner. Ian did some fantastic work with his research at the 3rd Battalion of the 506. A lot of this stuff that Paul was uncovered and put together by my Mark Bando and Paul Woodage. His book Angels of Mercy is outstanding, dealing with the aid station at Angeville Plain at the church, which was set up by Edward Allworth, who was the adjutant for 2nd Battalion of the 501st. So there is some ties to that, but Woody has already done an episode on his World War II television that's excellent, that discusses the Angels of Mercy. I highly recommend it. But if you want to find out the second half of this, and again, without all this research plus my own research, it wouldn't have been able to put this thing together. I especially want to thank Jill Smith, the daughter of Jack Schaffer, for contributing to this. Her dad's notes on her dad's service and photographs and one of his video interviews, and it's just been a real joy to put this together. But we're not done yet. Obviously, it's just the end of part one, and part two will be coming up when I get back from vacation. But thanks again for everybody for sticking along here and following along. And I hope you got something out of this. There was a lot of information. I apologize for a little halting at times with the delivery of the information, but you want to get it all right. So sometimes I had to work from the script, but again, I try to make sure that the tactical level details and the people who are involved in these actions are highlighted properly. So I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to doing the second half of this show. But thanks again, everyone, for following along and subscribing and hitting like and sharing. And those are our Patreon subscribers. Thank you again so much. It's just been great, and we're going to keep it going. Thanks, everybody. Take care.